Joe Biden is facing renewed scrutiny over his vote on the war in Iraq.
And the latest attacks come from Mayor Pete, but we're also looking at how politically savvy the South Bend, Indiana mayor appears to be, mystifyingly. We are back with Adam Green. He's co-founder of the Progressive Campaign Change Committee, and Marshall Kosloff. He is a media analyst, two great friends of the show. So, guys, I was looking at this, and I'm fascinated as to why it seems like Mayor Pete has very good political instincts, and outside of the rest of this field of very seasoned people. First of all, let's play the sound. He went after the former vice president on his Iraq war vote.
I guess we just disagree on that. I just don't believe that there's a justification for that vote. And I think it's an example of the difference between tenure and judgment.
Quick follow on the Joe Biden question. He suggested that some of his other foreign policy decisions are good ones, and he's happy to debate his record on foreign policy. Do you think that other good decisions negate the decision he made on the Iraq war?
Well, I think both of us are happy to debate that record on foreign policy, and I'm sure we'll get more chances to do it.
Right, and so then you have that moment, Adam, and then he goes out there, as far as I can tell, outside of Andrew Yang, the most definitive statement on Burisma, saying, I would not have wanted to see my son sit on the board of a foreign energy company. These are two great strategic blunders for Biden, and yet, why have we not seen more Democratic candidates go after Biden as directly as the mayor? I don't understand it.
Yeah, well, first, let's be clear that what he's making fundamentally is an electability argument.
Yes.
He's saying Joe Biden is part of the past, the establishment, wrong decisions. Obama used this to win in 2008. Joe Biden will lose in 2020. That's what he's saying.
Right.
Same with, there's controversy around Hunter. That's what he's saying. Why is he doing it? As I mentioned before, he just had his support cut in half in the last month. Who those people go to? Joe Biden.
Yeah.
These are largely progressive voters. They want a progressive president, but they are scared. And they're going to what they perceive in the current moment as the safe choice. It was Pete for a couple weeks. Now it's Biden. Hopefully in a couple weeks it'll be Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Why can't Elizabeth Warren make this same contrast, even when it comes to bankruptcy, for instance? Back in the 90s, she said Joe Biden is bad for women. She wrote an entire academic paper saying that his bankruptcy bill was going to, undermine women. She had this famous line where she said, we can't celebrate men in the evening, and when they harm us in the morning. I forget exactly what it was. Yeah. Yet, when pressed now, she doesn't do it. Is it the media's fault? Have we convinced all these candidates that Joe Biden is just going to evaporate on his own volition, and so they all think that hands off, they don't have to come after him?
Can we all agree that we can blame the media?
Yeah. We're not good people.
I mean, honestly, I think that the key words in your question were when pressed on it. I actually don't think she is pressed on it.
No, she was pressed on it.
Every now and
then. Early on, she was asked in a gaggle about it, and she came out swinging for Joe Biden early on in the election. And that hasn't been a thing yet. Yeah. But I agree with you. I mean, talking about medical bankruptcy and the corruption around that is part of her core message.
Yeah, right.
And hopefully she does.
It just seems like a natural extension. Go ahead, Mark.
But disagree. I mean, part of the issue here is it's who's competing for what spot. Right. So Mayor Pete and former Vice President Biden are competing for the same voters. So
he thinks they are, but in reality, it's kind of different.
I mean, it depends. Though. If we're looking at those early states, though, if we're looking for like sort of centrist adjacent voters who want normalcy, who like sort of establishment figures, they're competing in the same sector. Elizabeth Warren, as we saw from the polls, competing with Bernie Sanders.
Right.
So those attacks against Joe Biden that were listed, those would be great for, I think, a Sanders voter or for a voter outside the mainstream. But if you're actually looking to compete with those 32% of people who've stuck with Joe Biden for this long, for 40 years, I don't see why that would be effective.
The other part of the issue, though, actually, is whenever it comes down to, so Warren and the support, a lot of that is upper middle class, white liberals, particularly in these early states. Her and Pete have really been the ones that have gone after each other within that. And you see Pete, I think you're right, Adam, that he's seen some of his support evaporate, but not necessarily in the early states. I guess it just goes to this broader question of, I don't understand how Elizabeth Warren, who has a $10 million ad buy on corruption, the same day is asked about Burisma and says, I have to go check my plan on that. I mean, Bernie, this guy who has railed against things like this for so long, never says a word about it. He says, we got to focus on Trump, on the impeachment scandal. It just seems like the clearest delineator between the two and how they actually conduct themselves, their theories of politics. And it's just mystifying to me why Pete Buttigieg, who is the biggest shapeshifter in this whole race, is setting the purity standards, right? Like that's kind of what I'm trying to get at.
I think it's funny that you call him a shapeshifter.
Yeah.
I think we have seen a deterioration of Pete's brand in the last couple months. He used to be considered kind of a clean-cut, authentic, unobjectionable kind of guy. And now he's seen as shifty, mean, nasty, dishonest, using corporate talking points that reflect his big money donors, right? That's not good, right? And honestly, I think this is a little bit of a Hail Mary that he's throwing these attacks at Biden, which is good for the whole field if you're not Pete and you're not Biden. So I'm fine with that.
Right.
And I think the thing that makes the most sense here from a Mayor Pete attack perspective is the focus on the Iraq war. Because the biggest strength he has, one of his weaknesses, aka his lack of experience, is also one of his biggest strengths, aka he has no responsibility for the debacles on the foreign side of the Iraq war, for a lot of domestic policy decisions. That goes to the bankruptcy discussion right there too. I think it's an obvious opportunity for him because people are just not going to count experience as a good thing when it means you're responsible.
It's the Obama route in 2008.
Except he was in Iraq for McKinsey. And I also found a video of him yesterday talking about the Iraq war. And he's talking to a Notre Dame audience in 2013, which is a year after David Petraeus has resigned in disgrace for mishandling classified information. And he called Petraeus's strategy in Iraq radically progressive. And later he called it profoundly progressive. And he condemned Move On for running an ad. Maybe we have that.
I think we have Ryan's tweet
here.
That we can throw up.
They ran an ad while Petraeus was testifying that called him Betrayus. That may have been before your time. Adam might remember it. And it became this huge controversy. The Senate even passed a resolution to condemn Move On, which Obama chickened out and didn't even vote on. But here you have Buttigieg condemning Move On years later and saying that Petraeus is radically progressive. So we do have him at least weighing in. He did oppose the war, as basically everyone at Harvard did. But it's not exactly clear why that was.
Yeah, I need to push back on that. So there's I opposed the Iraq. Well, not that it counted because I was in 5th grade, but hypothetically,
Me too.
I opposed the. I opposed
points for that.
Everyone was mad at me in my class. But,
I opposed the Iraq war, but what Mayor Pete was speaking about was the surge in 2007, which once again. Once you invade a country, once you break a country, once you lead to hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths, you have a responsibility, I think, for seeking to repair and protect the people of that country. That's what the surge was, and I think that we could look at what happened in Iraq after 2011. After we left the country, we see the rise of ISIS. We see basically the Syrian civil war. I think it's very reasonable to defend the idea that the U.S. had a responsibility, and that's what General Petraeus' strategy was about.
Yeah, you're absolutely. I agree with you 100% there. I think it's about the phrasing of radically progressive? Is that what your qualm is? No, I'm trying to understand. I really am because I'm
not necessarily saying I have qualms exactly, but I think you get an insight with his attack, particularly on Move On there, about where his instincts lie on the war.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think part of what this really underscores is that Pete does not have a worldview.
No.
Right? With someone like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, you know where they will land, even on unpredicted issues. Right? Pete is very good at taking political shots at people.
Yes.
He's an opportunist in that way, which might be good politically, but he has no idea what he's going to do when in office. And the worry for progressives is that's what leads to somebody surrounding themselves with more Rahm Emanuel types and other people, right? Consultant, establishment, political class people, big money influence, right? He has not said he won't appoint big money people to being ambassadors. Like, that's the worry. Who will surround this person? Who will be talking in his ear as he's shape-shifting, which is a great word.
And that's probably, I think, the best articulation of all of this, which is that it was hot in 2013 to be pro-Surge and to be pro-Petraeus, which means, so Pete, his ideology is kind of tracked with the New York Times editorial board, right? It's not a worldview which is actually cemented. I mean, Bernie's out there. I mean, he opposed the Iraq war, he opposed the Afghan war, right? I mean, like, this guy is. I mean, it's a total. You can say whatever you want about those particular decisions,
Actually,
but
Bernie didn't. He said he's wrong on that.
Or sorry, he was wrong about the Afghan war, but it's about that worldview that seems so cemented that people, and I think what you're getting at, is you can generally point to an issue that they probably have never spoken about, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and actually even Joe Biden. And you'll generally be able to see where are these candidates going to be able to fall on those things. I don't think you can do the same thing for Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah, and actually, that's No, that's the great articulation of it, which I think the problem that I have with that, basically where that worldview leads us, I could see that worldview beating Trump in 2020. The issue, though, is what's going to happen in 2024 or 2028. Because if you see sort of this sort of go back to this sort of ill-formed consensus from pre-2016, I think that's exactly the sort of thing that causes populist revolts on the right and on the left. So I think if we're looking to have a sustainable future in this country, we need people who have a theory, who have a case, who've put some thought that isn't just reflecting conventional wisdom.
Right, exactly. All right, guys, really, really great panel. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right, tomorrow on Rising, we're going to have some years in review with friends of the show, Katie Halper and Kyle Kolinsky.
And a deep dive into Uber's troubled history when dealing with their drivers.
It's going to be an interesting one. Happy New Year, everybody. Part of the best thing of this year has been able to join the show, be with all of you. I wish Crystal was here to celebrate it, but she's going to be back on January 2nd. So tune in on Thursday and have a very happy New Year.
Happy New Year.